Okay, I think we're live now. I just talked to myself for 5 minutes, but we're definitely live now. Can you hear me, Mrs Simmons? Excellent. Okay, welcome to our third live session for parents and carers. I'm going to quickly hand over to Mrs Simmons in a minute because I know there's some families who are going to be ready to jump onto a online induction for year 6. I think it's St Mark's that are doing that tonight at 7 o'clock. So make sure we're finished in time for you to move over to that. If this is your first time, then don't forget, or if it's not your first time, still don't forget that you can actually join in by sending me questions by using the question mark bubble at the top of your screen. So please say hi, but also ask me any questions that I can feed into the discussion with Mrs Simmons. And also, I can type you some responses on the spot here, or we may take them away when we download the logs. We can feed it into future sessions as well. So I am going to prepare the screen because I am conscious that some of you guys want to get to that induction meeting for secondary school. So I want to get started quickly. I'm just going to get Mrs Simmons on the screen. I think we're ready. I will mute myself and hand over to Mrs Simmons. Let's do that. Let's see if it works. Okay, Mrs Simmons, you're on screen. No, you've just closed down your presentation. There you go. Let me just put it on. Voila. Brilliant. Fantastic.
Okay. Oh, is that okay? Is that ready?
Yep, you're on screen and your presentation is there as well. Off you go.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, hi everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight, and I'm going to talk through some of the strategies that we might be able to use if children are having a tricky time or struggling. Last week I clicked on the PowerPoint a bit too many times, so I'm going to try really hard today to make sure I'm only clicking on one page at a time. So we're going to think about behaviour as a communicator of emotion and how we manage big feelings. I will recap some of the things that we talked about in sessions 1 and 2, but I'll make sure I use different examples. So if you were here for session 1 and 2, then hopefully it's still helpful because it's a different example. So I'm going to start off with some different activities, and I've put them on the screen as things that you could do alongside a child to either acknowledge a loss or to celebrate something positive. So I've said acknowledge a loss, and that could be something like not being able to go to football club, or it could be something like not being able to see a family member for a really long period of time. So it doesn't have to be a big loss, it could be a little loss, and something that you'll kind of get back when things go back to normal, and to celebrate positive. So I'll just talk through some of them. Some of them are hopefully kind of self-explanatory when you look at them. The salt jar, that's a really nice one to do, and what you can do is just get just regular plain table salt and chalk, and then if you put the salt on a piece of paper that you've folded in half, and you can colour it in with the chalk, and that's really nice. It feels quite nice, quite therapeutic. So you can do that together, and then you can attribute the different layers to anything you like, really. So I've said, as an example, you might think about positive things that have happened during lockdown and link each colour to something positive, or maybe think about the positive qualities of somebody you're missing. So like, my nanny is really kind is the red layer, my nanny is a great cook is the yellow layer, and you might even want to like write a little label that tells you what the different layers mean and put it next to it. One tip for doing those though, if you do them, really pack them as full as you can with salt, and then probably put a bit of cotton wool in the top as well before you put on the lid, and that means that the salt layers don't move around too much. Other examples we've got here, things like painting stones, you can go and find them together and then paint different things on them. Drawing around your hands, you could use it in a similar way to the salt jar, like writing positives in the finger spaces, or maybe you would do 5 things I've really loved about lockdown, or 5 things I'm looking forward to in September. So you can kind of adapt them as you would like to. The memory bag or the memory box, you could make maybe things that remind you of your class, or things that remind you of your school year. You could perhaps fold up bits of paper and write, I don't know, if you're in year 4, like my top memories of year 4, or things that I really enjoyed in year 4. So you can kind of adapt them to be useful for you. Now I'm just going to move on. Some more activities here. The draw your feelings activity. This one's really nice. So you play it with the child. So it's 2 people playing, and you do, one of you would draw the squiggles in one colour, and then the other person has to change them into a picture. So maybe you change it into an animal or an object or anything, just to be really creative. And then you've got these 6 pictures, and then together you can tell a story. So that's a really nice one to do. And then above it you've got the box. That's just a page split into 4, and you draw your feelings. And then these on the right, you've got these scavenger hunts. So they don't have to be done outside, like the little pictures are examples of ones you could do outside, but you can do them in your house as well. So the examples I've put there, things, find me something that begins with the first letter of your name, find me something that helps you to calm down, find me something that you think smells nice. So you can be quite creative with those. And then I've got one more, which is a nice breathing activity. So I think last week we looked at the little windmills for breathing, and the like plastic straws blowing like a cotton wool ball, or those kind of things. This one is more a story, so kind of taking the attention away from breathing. So pretending you've made something really nice, and then breathing in through your nose, what does it smell like, and then breathing out through your mouth, so pretending you're cooling them down. You can also do the breathing one with your hands as well, so you can, I think it's called finger breathing. So as you go up the side of your finger or thumb, you breathe in a really deep breath, and then as you come down the other side, breathing out. And you're trying to model like breathing from your tummy, rather than kind of shallow breathing from your chest, so kind of deep calming breaths. So that's just a few kind of quick activities I thought I would share with you before we kind of get into the main parts for today. Were there any questions about those, Mr. Beament?
No, there were no direct questions, but there was one question around getting copies of the handouts, and I know that we're going to send your slides and this information out when we send out the video recording of this, which will probably be the beginning of next week, because it takes about a day to download. Okay, we'll just go on. So today I was thinking about the best order to kind of go through today's bits and pieces. So I'm going to talk to you first about behaviour as a communicator of emotion and what that means, and then we'll have a little look at the kind of biological reaction to stress in your body. I'll do a recap on the VRFs, and I've got 4 or 5 different specific examples, so one longer example and a few shorter examples, and then at the end I've got some kind of lists of activities for the being, doing, and I think the thinking stage as well. So that's what I'm going to try and go through today. Move on. Okay, so behaviour as a communicator of emotion. So if you think back to looking after a baby, the only way that they can communicate what they're feeling, what they need, is through their behaviour, because they don't have language or any other ways
communicating. So it says here they might giggle or throw their arms up or shout or look away, because these are the ways that they can express their feelings, express what they need. So it's pre-verbal ways of communication, and when an adult is responding to these, so through eye contact or through making noises or like movement, rocking, those kind of things, what they're doing is supporting the baby by kind of externalizing what's going on for them. So it might be through like a soothing noise or facial expressions, all of those kind of things, and giving language to that experience. So there's a video that they show as part of the Thrive training. I think it's probably on YouTube, actually. You could probably find it. And it's called, I think it's called like the dance of the nappy, and it shows a mum and the baby, and she's changing the baby's nappy, and you can see like all of those things going on. So the eye contact and how she's kind of talking to the baby, obviously not about what she's doing, but you can really see that attachment and that kind of pre-verbal communication going on there. And we touched briefly on it last week, but that's really important, that giving language to the experience, because what that's doing over time, over repeated experiences, is helping to make the links between the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain through that section in the middle called the corpus callosum. So it's matching the child's language, it's matching language to the child's experience. So when we can kind of apply this as children get older, obviously children do have more language as they're getting older typically, but we can still kind of look at the behaviour and see how that is communicating emotion, so thinking about what that behaviour might be communicating. So I thought this was quite an interesting image. So on the top of the iceberg, you can see some of the things you might see if somebody is dysregulated. So biting, throwing, kicking. And I think it's probably important to say that dysregulation isn't always like acting out in that sort of way. So it can be withdrawn as well. But here we've used those examples, and then underneath it's given some of the examples of the feelings that those behaviours might be communicating. So things like, I need to release my emotions and this is the only way I know how, or I don't feel understood, or I'm tired. And that's not necessarily what children would be consciously thinking, but it is perhaps some of the, the many emotions that kind of behaviour might be communicating. So this is an image that we've seen before as well, helping to build emotional resilience in children. So I've shown before with the string. I've lost the end. What I was showing is if you have kind of one experience and then the next experience and the next experience, you can see if that was the pathway in your brain, you're kind of strengthening that pathway. So repetitive, positive experiences are helping to shape a child's reaction to different experiences and to stressful experiences. And we would do that, Thrive talk about doing that, so helping to strengthen kind of positive neural pathways through using the VRFs, which again we spoke about last week. So that was validating the feelings and attuning to what the child is feeling, and I will talk about this in a bit more detail in a minute. Containing, so helping the child to feel safe, whether that's through boundaries and rules or through kind of physical space, those kind of things. and then helping a child to regulate and think about how they may respond differently in the future. And then afterwards you would come back, and if there's been any of those behaviours that we saw on the top of the iceberg, so things like biting, kicking, shouting, throwing, you would shine a light on those behaviours and say, I noticed when you were feeling very cross, I noticed you threw this object at me, or I noticed you bit your brother, or shining a light on that behaviour and then explaining that that is not okay, that's not acceptable. So we talked about validating the feelings, but not validating or accepting the behaviour and looking at them separately. So this model here shows the different age developmental strands of the Thrive approach. So we've got being, doing and thinking, and those are the first strands that a child would meet. So being is up to 6 months, I think, and then doing up to 18 months. And then I think thinking is up to 3 years. And this like Jenga model here is another way of showing these strands, so the colours are coordinated, and it's really normal for everybody to have gaps in their age developmental milestones, I suppose. So everybody has gaps, and that's really normal. But this wobbly Jenga to the right is showing that actually if you have too many gaps in each stage, then it's really difficult to kind of have good stress management systems or good resilience independently, because there are too many gaps in the stage before. So through using Thrive and through using these approaches, you're helping to kind of fill some of the gaps and to help build a child's stress management systems. And the reason I've included this one here is because everybody recycles back through the stages. So if you experience something very stressful, you've broken something that's very important to you, or you've lost something, everybody would kind of go back to being initially, and then how well developed your stress management systems are would depend on how kind of quickly you are able to work your way back up to kind of where you should be within the age developmental stage. So we're helping children to have alternative ways of managing the situation rather than some of those behaviours that are not acceptable, like kicking and biting, or perhaps some of those that are less noticeable, so withdrawing, or I've forgotten the word, I know it's on one of the slides coming up, but where you, I think it's somatizing, where you are attributing it to like a physical ailment, so maybe like a tummy ache or a headache or a different ailment there. So stress in your body, so the HPA axis, which I've got a little picture of here, you can see at the top the brain, and then these are some of the chemicals that are released by your that are triggered to be released responding to stress. So you've got cortisol, which is known as the stress chemical, and that is released at high levels if you're in a fight or flight response. And I wanted to show you that one today because it can take up to 7 hours for cortisol to leave the body. So if a child has experienced something that they've found very stressful, it can sometimes take a really long time to calm down, and that is linked to the fact that cortisol, the hormone in your body, is taking a really long time to leave. So that's why I wanted to show you that one today. Were there any questions so far? Or should I carry on to the next bit about the brain?
Carry on, please.
Lovely. So the brain, the picture of the triune brain that we're really familiar with. So you've got your brainstem, the limbic system, and within the limbic system is your amygdala. And this is like your alert system within your brain. So that's the area that's going to initiate a fight or flight response. So it kind of seeks out the stressful signals of the stressful situation, and that sort of tells your body we need to make a fight, flight or freeze response. And it knocks out the other functions of the limbic system. So the limbic system is responsible for seeking, playing. You don't need those things if you're in a stressful situation. So you would then be acting from your fight, flight, freeze response. You don't have your thinking brain online. You don't have those kind of options available to you. So it says here, your brain is hardwired to ensure survival, and the fear, rage and loss circuits, which are located in your brain stem, would be triggered by the amygdala. And then your behavioural choices are limited because your thinking brain, your human brain, the part that processes consequences, choice, is then not online at that time. So it's the adult's role to be alongside the child, to lend their adult thinking brain to provide language and to kind of offer back the experience in manageable chunks so that the child is able to kind of make sense of that. So we'll move on to some examples of that in a moment. So the kind of stress that might trigger a fight, flight or freeze response would be different to each person. So for some people, that would be kind of an appropriate situation that's kind of triggering that. But for some people, it's different for every person. So if somebody is reacting in that way to lots of different situations, then that can be quite tricky. So it could be, I've put here some examples, like a man in a red jumper. If you've had a negative experience and somebody was wearing a red jumper, that could be then a trigger for the fight, flight or freeze reaction, but perhaps not something you would necessarily expect. For some children, it might be loud noises, something like fireworks, or like traffic, vehicles, or for other children, it could be having somebody too close to them. So it can be different for everybody, but obviously your fight, flight and freeze response is designed to kind of keep you alive in the most kind of basic sense. So it's quite a big response to the situation, and what we want to be able to do is to help children to kind of make that situation manageable, make it feel survivable, and help them to develop ways of managing those situations without having to kind of go into that state. Repeated positive experiences will help with this. So that's helping children to manage threat or perceived threat. Obviously, it's different for each person themselves. So we're looking to help children develop a healthy response, and a healthy response is obviously different for different situations. So the kind of classic example is being chased by a tiger. The healthy response there is, you need to take action straight away. Whereas that kind of reaction to a small insect being near you might perhaps be a disproportionate response. So it's different in different situations, and we're helping children to manage that through repeated positive experiences alongside an adult, a trusted adult. So this next slide is the one I was thinking of earlier. Ways of discharging emotional stress. So aggression was probably the ones that we saw at the top of the iceberg image, and perhaps agitation could be classed as going in that kind of section too. But other reactions that are perhaps less obvious, over adaptation. So this would be where a child is very desperate to please, very desperate to fit in, doing nothing. So a bit similar to the sort of freeze response. Or these two here, incapacitation. So that one is kind of where somebody feels like they don't have any strength or power in a situation. And somatizing, so where children are presenting their emotions as a physical symptom. So I suppose a typical one might be a tummy ache or something like that, or maybe saying like, oh, my arm hurts, or those kind of things. So there's a range of ways in which children can show emotional stress, and then at those times we're going to be using the VRFs, which I'm going to recap next, to help manage the feelings, make the experience feel survivable, help them to build new ways of responding. And obviously it will take time and repetition, repeated experiences over time, and then addressing any behaviours that are not acceptable afterwards. And you would always come back to behaviours that are not acceptable, but just later when the child is in a calmer place, their thinking brain is back online, so that they're able to process that more easily. Were there any questions at the moment, Mr. Beament?
No, if you carry on, that's great.
Yeah.
I'm doing some separate replies to people, but
Okay.
so if you carry on, that's great.
Yeah. So the VRFs, we've talked about them last week, and people asked, was there a sheet available or something like that which would give examples of the kind of language that you might use at each stage? So I've put together something, I'm just having a look when it is. In a few slides time, it's coming up, which has got those examples on the slide, so I'll talk through them then, and then they'll also go out with the video as a handout. So a tune where you're matching the child's emotions, so not if a child's very cross, is shouting, you're not going to go in with a very calm voice, you're going to try and match that. You would be matching body language, you would try and match facial expressions, and that kind of helps the child to feel that their emotions have been understood. Then you would move to validate, and I think these kind of can all come at the same time or in a slightly different order than is shown, and that's okay. But the next one in the kind of queue is validate. So you're saying you're wondering into how they might be feeling and understanding the feeling. So if somebody's been left out at playtime, or I wonder if you're feeling really lonely. That's really hard, isn't it, when you feel like you've been left out? So you're helping the child to feel that their experience has been understood, and you're validating how they're feeling. If they've kicked somebody because they've been left out, we're not talking about that at this specific moment, but we will definitely come to that. Containing, this is the part where you're sort of offering the experience back. So, you must have been feeling so cross that you were left out, that has you know, it must have been really kind of bubbling up inside you. You must have been feeling so angry. And I wonder if that's why you've kicked somebody, because you're feeling so cross, and you would have probably taken them away from the situation. So, you know, that's containing, that's helping to make the safe space safe. And you're kind of talking through the experience, but you're not offering like a judgment on it. You're just kind of wandering in to the child's experience and kind of offering that one back. And then the regulating part is the part where you are wondering about how it could be different next time. So when you're really cross and you get that feeling in your tummy, or your hands are curling up, or when you're feeling really lonely or feeling really left out, I wonder if you could, and then you're suggesting some alternatives. So trying to present them as a statement, but doing that alongside the child so that they feel like they've got some ownership. So I wonder if you could come and find me, or I wonder if you could show me a card or a picture. So offering them a different way of expressing how they're feeling, rather than having to kind of kick somebody to show how they're feeling. And then afterwards you would return to that and say, you know, I've noticed that you kicked this person. We don't kick other people. That's not okay. And then there would be a consequence which would be appropriate for the child. So it might be making an apology, it might be writing a letter or a card, something like that. And then there's the picture of the brain here, because sometimes if a child is very dysregulated, so they're biting, they're kicking, they're shouting, sometimes we need to use less language until the child has calmed down. So we're still thinking about this process, but using less language. So you would be clearly stating your expectations. So still doing the attuning part, like, wow, you are really cross, you've just kicked the wall. We don't kick the wall. I expect you to sit on the chair. And then nothing more really. You might need to repeat that a couple of times, but kind of clearly stating your expectation. And then when the child is able to do that, then you can start to do some of the kind of wondering part. So yeah, and that can feel quite difficult, I think, sometimes, because it's kind of your instinct to want to sort of you know, ask why, or question, or kind of try and make what's happening stop straight away. But I think remembering that the child isn't in a place where they're kind of processing and thinking about what you're saying, less language and very direct language phrased around what you are expecting the child to do at that time is helpful at that particular moment. So you're doing the attuning part, and then I suppose it's almost like a pause before you're moving on to the validate part. The containing part would be really important as well. So if somebody's being very like outwardly dysregulated, you'd want to make sure they were in a safe space where they weren't going to hurt themselves or going to hurt other people. So that would be important. But yeah, less language at that part is often quite helpful. So I've got some example scenarios now, and this list sort of covers off the main kind of points of the process. So the kind of things that you're thinking about working through with the child. So you're watching what's happening, thinking, wondering in, imagining what that might be like. You're using the VRFs, focusing in, wondering if, and finding a new way of managing. So I've got like a longer example here. So imagining that a child at playtime has told another child that they can't play football with the group, and this isn't the first time that it's happened, and the child who's been told you can't play has kind of taken themselves away, and they're sat on their own, they're looking down, they're really quiet. So you would notice that. You might think about, oh, how might I feel if that was me? And then you might go over and sit next to the person and say, oh, you know, this looks really, really hard for you. You look like you're on your own, and you're having a really tricky time. I'm wondering if you're upset because people have asked you perhaps not to join in, or I'm wondering if you feel that you can't join in because you might not know that they've been asked not to. And you might say something like, you know, I've noticed that when you feel like things go wrong, you prefer to be on your own. I'm wondering if it's helpful for me to sit beside you. So you're offering that as like a statement rather than a question, so that the child knows that they're not on their own. So you've attuned to the child by sitting next to them. You know, you would probably like be using like a softer voice, trying to kind of match how they're feeling. You've kind of done the containing part because you're in a safe space together, you're away from everybody else because the child has, you know, chosen to take themselves away. And then you are validating through saying, you know, that's really hard, isn't it, when you're on your own, and doing some of the wondering in. And then when you're moving on to the regulating stage, you might be saying something like, you know, it looks like things get better for you when somebody comes and sits next to you, somebody is talking to you about things, you know, and I've been thinking, if you're feeling left out in the future, perhaps it would be helpful to come and find me, or perhaps it would be helpful to tell the grown-up who is available at playtime. So you've kind of done you've used all of the VRFs through your conversation, and you're helping the child to find a new way of managing. So you might say, you know, when you get that feeling inside that nobody cares and you're all on your own, then you might think, oh, I'm going to go and find, you know, name the person that they're going to go and find. And then that will be kind of the beginning of developing a new behaviour. And obviously you'll need kind of repeated experiences of that, obviously not the same situation necessarily, but repeated experiences of kind of solving those big emotions alongside a trusted adult, and that will begin to develop a new way of managing things. And sometimes I've got my little puppet here. Sometimes it's easier for children to kind of talk to a puppet or a toy rather than a person, and it's not necessarily dependent on the child's age. So I think it's just different for different children, really. And some children do just prefer to speak to a puppet. So if you were going to use something like the puppet, you might sort of say, oh, the duck is wondering if you're feeling really lonely and really left out. And then sometimes the child will, you know, it will be too intense to talk to you and like manage the eye contact and those kind of things. But then they might be quite happy to talk to a puppet instead. So possibly, you know, worth a go if that's something that is kind of tricky within that situation, getting a child to open up. And then I've got a few more examples. I'm really sorry, these are a little bit blurry. I couldn't get the images to be any better, but I thought these were nice examples, like quite short examples. So it shows that the VRFs don't necessarily need to be really long interactions, like it can be quite a short one. So this one says, I will read it just because I'm not sure how clear it is on your screen. I'm scared of the dark. I don't want to be alone. And then the adult is saying, it's hard to be scared of the dark. So validating. I bet many of your friends feel the same way. And that's also kind of validating because it's helping the experience to feel more normal and more survivable. Maybe it would help if we put on a nightlight and you can cuddle Teddy. So that's kind of the, you know, the regulating part. You're offering a new way of managing. I'll be right outside the room, but here if you need me. And that part is the containing part, because you're saying to the child, you know, I'm not going to leave you on your own. I'm here with you. So even though, you know, the adult is not right next to the child, they're saying where they are, and you know, they're still quite close. So that was that one. And I think that one shows quite well that it's not necessarily attune, validate, contain, regulate. They can sort of come in a different order as well. This next one, this one is specifically related to like illness and maybe the coronavirus. Mummy, I'm scared that the sickness is going to spread more now. And the adult said, you know, oh, I can hear that you're scared, and things opening up, so like shops and other things, can be really scary. So validating the feelings. As a family, we're going to go really slowly and carefully, and it's my job to keep you safe. So that's a line actually that Thrive use quite a lot. So it's an adult's job to keep you safe. Adults are in charge to keep you safe, and that's quite containing. Let's come up with some things we feel comfortable with doing first. So that's the regulating part there. And it's quite important to kind of have the child's to do that together is quite important. So even if it's kind of like the adult making the suggestions, so that you're offering options and the child is picking from your option, so it's an option that you would like, that will give the child a sense of ownership over that as well. I think I've got one more. This is the last one. Mummy, drive carefully. I'm worried we will get in an accident. And the mum is saying, oh, I understand that you're worried. So validating the feelings. Going fast can feel really scary. So normalising, kind of explaining that many people might feel that way. Mummy is driving carefully. It's my job to keep you safe. So that's, again, containing and helping to make that situation manageable. Would singing a happy song while we drive help you to feel better? So again, the regulating part, offering a new solution. So hopefully they were helpful. I just thought they were quite nice because they were quite short examples, and also examples where it wasn't necessarily like a big dysregulation. So I thought those ones might be useful. Do we have any questions now, or should I go through the scripts part of some of the language?
I had one from a few minutes back. I didn't want to interrupt you on such a flow. It was about the when the stages that you talked about, and what sort of gaps you may have between those, and could you have extensive gaps, for example, or what gaps that span over hours or days potentially?
I think probably more hours rather than days, but yeah, so it could be really short. So like these examples here, you've probably done the whole thing in like one conversation. But if a child was very dysregulated, doing kicking, shouting, hitting, those kind of things, the process would probably be longer, because you would be saying, no, we don't do that. Don't do that, it's not safe. Adults are here to keep you safe. I expect you to. And then it might take a while for a child to stop doing that. And I think for the first few times, probably certainly, Thrive talk about kind of pushing through the pain barrier. So if you're putting in the barrier and you're saying, no, we don't do that, that behaviour is not acceptable, I want you to do this instead, a child might kind of push against that and it's important to say, no, we're not doing that. This is what we're doing. So at that point, you are just kind of doing the containing, maybe a little bit of the validating. You might have said, I can see you're so cross because you are, and then name what they're doing. That's not okay. We're going to do this instead. And that might take a while. So, it might take half an hour, 30 minutes, 40 minutes for a child to realise that you're not going to change what you're saying. You are going to wait until they've done what you've asked them to do, and then you might be able to move on to the wondering in stage. Sometimes with the shining the light part, so when you return back to what the child was doing, sometimes it is more appropriate to do that the next day. It probably depends on the situation, but if a child's had like a really big meltdown and it's taken quite a long time to calm down from that, it may feel more appropriate the next day to return to it and say, yesterday when you were, I noticed that bit wasn't okay, we're going to need to. So it is always important to kind of return to the behaviour afterwards, but yeah, sometimes that could be the next day. I think where possible, like definitely within school, we try and do that within the same day, so that the whole experience, you've made your apologies, we've resolved the situation, and now we're moving on. But it is we definitely do that in school as well, sometimes return to it the next day if that's more appropriate.
And listening to you, I can think of examples when I've got this wrong as well. So it's important that parents recognise that you might have listened to you and understand it, but we all make mistakes, don't we? And those sorts of things, sometimes you don't get it quite right.
Oh, definitely. And like afterwards, like you'll probably reflect on it and think, oh, I wonder if if I'd have done this differently. So for example, sometimes you might say something and you've intended it to be kind of calming, and it's really not. So for example, saying to a child, we really need to calm down, in my experience generally isn't it's not a good phrase to use. It's not it doesn't really tend to result in a calming down sort of action. So yeah, I think you definitely, like everybody definitely gets it wrong or reflects and thinks, oh yeah, that bit didn't work so well. But then that's really useful, isn't it? Because then for next time, actually it was that bit that didn't work very well, so I'll use less language, or I won't use that particular word. Okay, so this is little like clips of the handout that I've done, and just some of the examples. It's by no means like a limited example of things you might say, but it's just some of the things that we probably some of the language that we regularly use at school. So for the attuning part, like wow, the wow part is that's quite a good word to use, or like an oh at the beginning, because you can sort of adapt that to match the emotions. If somebody's really cross, then you can match it with that, or if somebody's really sad, then you can sort of go, oh, wow, you look so sad. So that's quite a good word to use. I'm wondering if you're feeling really anxious, because I've noticed that you keep fiddling with the sleeve of your jumper. So trying to name the feeling and give language to the name of the feeling and match it with the action that the child is doing, that's really useful. Or another example might be, you must be feeling really, I'm wondering if you're feeling really annoyed, or you must be feeling really annoyed with this person because you've turned your chair around so that your back is facing them. So linking the feeling with the actions. Oh yeah, and here's another example. I can see how cross you are because you've kicked your chair over. I wonder if you've hurt your foot. So sometimes that kind of, you know, I care about you, I'm worried about you, will be enough to kind of start bringing the child down. So yeah, using facial expressions, body language, and it's just trying to make the child feel like they are understood and you understand how they're feeling. And yeah, this paragraph here, I've sort of mentioned a little bit already. So I've said if a child is really visibly dysregulated, less language can be helpful. It's really hard to do because I think it is many people's kind of natural instinct to want to use lots of language, but kind of keeping it really limited can really help, because the thinking brain, not online, we're not processing what you're saying anyway. I can see you're cross, we don't kick the table, I expect you to sit on the chair. And I think what children will often do is, you know, try and draw you into a conversation or a bit of a discussion, maybe a bit of an argument about it. Why can't I kick the table? I'm not going to sit on the chair. I don't want to sit on the chair. I can kick the table because I can. But we don't want to give attention for the behaviours that we don't want. So just repeating, I expect you to sit on the chair, or, you know, I'm not going to talk about this with you until you sit on the chair. So just kind of positively reinforcing the behaviour that you expect. And then you can kind of move on to, I can see your feeling, I'm wondering if. For the validating part, you might say something like, that must have been so difficult when, or I wonder if you felt, you must have felt. And again, kind of linking it to what you notice. So, just trying to think of an example. You must have felt so excited when the drama teacher came in, and I could tell because you jumped on top of your chair and put your hands in the air. So it's not always like overexcited can tip into dysregulation as well, not necessarily just angry or cross or sad. Validating the feeling, not the behaviour. I know we talked about that a lot. So just being alongside a child in a safe place is containing, and it might be necessary to kind of move to a safe space, or, you know, a kind of private space, as private as possible. So you're trying to avoid the child from kind of feeling shame from an audience, but also avoiding giving an audience which might be kind of tempting to perform to, like inadvertently, not necessarily your conscious thoughts. So removing an audience, and it may be easier to ask, you know, if there were perhaps siblings together, it may be easier to ask the other sibling to leave rather than to move the child who is dysregulated, or the other way round, depending on the situation. Again, wondering in linking it to other people, so normalizing. I expect lots of people would feel cross if somebody broke their new book, or I know I would feel really cross if somebody kicked me and not the football. So kind of helping that to feel more normal. Reminding of rules, so, you know, we don't hurt ourselves, or we don't hurt other people. Stop, sit on the chair. And I think throughout that, we talked last week about Dan Hughes's place, which was like the kind of attitude to adopt. So it's playful, loving, accepting, curious, empathic. So I think trying to remain as calm as possible yourself is really important, and really tricky, that's quite important. So we're just kind of observing and wondering in a calm way. I hope this isn't too small on your screen. So the regulating is offering possible ways to repair the situation and perhaps manage the situation in a similar way. And I think often here you'll be encouraging them to signal to an adult that things are difficult. And then sometimes you can do the shining a light alongside, or sometimes it would be afterwards. So some examples here. When you were very angry, I noticed that you banged your hands on the table. I'm imagining that felt like the only way you could manage the situation. And then I'm wondering if when you're feeling really angry, you could go to your safe space. So it might be like in school, it might be like the book corner, or they might have a separate table, or at home it might be like a den or something like that. So that could be one option. Or I'm wondering if you could tell me, or find an adult. So offering different options, but kind of offering them as a statement rather than a question. So not really a would you like to. And then that would be when you're shining the light, that would be the time to address consequences and help the child make repairs. So I've given an example here. I noticed when you were very angry, you threw your chair on the floor. We don't do this because we show respect for everything in the classroom. I'd like you to put it back and say sorry too. And then if that happened again a few days later, it would need to be the same consequence again. So kind of consistent to help the children understand and make those links, those kind of thinking links between action and consequence. When I do this, this will happen, and that will take time. Were there any questions there?
No, if you keep going, that's fine.
Okay. So people have asked in previous weeks about which strategies are useful to support children, and really any activity alongside a trusted adult is great. That's a really good one to do. And it doesn't have to be a long activity. About 20 minutes would be brilliant, but it could be longer if you wanted. An activity that's linked to the child's interest, your interest, something that's fun, loads of different ideas of things that you can do together. So I've got some examples for, I think, being, doing and thinking. Yeah, so I've got some examples for each of those, but there are loads more, and you've probably got loads of really good ideas of things that you could do that your child would really like as well. So being. So at being, it is the time when a child is learning about feeling safe, feeling special, and having their needs met. So this is obviously first encountered when a child is very young, and so thinking about some of those things that you might be doing then, and sort of bringing those ideas into your activities now. So lots of things with eyes and making eye contact. So all those games like clapping games, high fives, peekaboo, all of those kind of things are about making eye contact and feeling noticed, feeling special. You might do dancing or high fives, lots of nice activities, simple activities together. And so at school, we might use some strategies like this with everybody. So kind of noticing, making eye contact with people, like offering genuine compliments, those kind of things. And that all kind of helps to meet being needs. And then doing. So at doing, the adult's role is the co-adventurer. So you are working alongside the child and exploring, having fun together, and you're putting language to the child's experience. So explaining, showing what you're doing, encouraging children to join in, so it could be anything: gardening, cooking, creating something, making something, those kind of simple games like tag, chase, all of those kind of things. And it might be here, I've said giving your child something they can carry in their pocket when they're away from you that will remind them of you. So helping a child to understand that you're keeping them in mind even when you're not together. So they're still really important to you, they're still special, you've got them in mind. And then thinking, this is when you move into kind of thinking about cause and effect and consequences. So some of the games that will help with that, like I've put a Jenga game here, or all of those games that if you do this, this might happen. You might be putting together rules and then what the consequence would be if they were broken. Noticing problems and then getting the child to help you solve the problem. So all of these things are kind of helping to meet the needs at those developmental stages. Learning about not winning every time is really tricky, isn't it? So learning about taking turns, simple board games, and talking about feelings, starting to talk about and think about feelings. So I think that is everything I kind of had to talk about today. I'm not sure if anybody had any question. I'm not sure what the time is actually.
It's 4 minutes past 7. So I know a few to go to the St. Mark's thing. That's fine.
So a little bit late, sorry.
No, it's fine. It was really good stuff. I've learned loads again. Like every time you do tell me about Thrive, I pick up some new bits. So I hope it's useful for everybody. I've managed to answer most of the questions. I think I've managed to answer all the ones that have come through, or I've managed to feed them in to the questions I asked you. So what we'll do is what we normally do. We'll leave the session going for about 10 minutes, but we'll disappear. And then that gives any parents or carers an opportunity just to drop comments or questions, and we'll try and build that in to next week. So next week we've got another session. I don't know, have you got what's the idea about next week?
Next week is about managing anxiety. So I've got some interesting thoughts about tantrums, different types of tantrums, and how you can use some of these strategies to help manage those. Again, more activities, different specific examples you can use with children. There's probably all I can remember at the moment, but there is more, and I'll write it in the description when we send out the link.
Wonderful. And then the final one, which will be the last week of term, will just be an opportunity for us to spin back round, pick up any regular questions, and anyone else who gives us questions between now and then. So
and we'll put together some frequently asked questions and some kind of brief answers to those that people can kind of look back over in the future, if that's helpful.
So if you have got any questions that you haven't sent me already, we'll disappear now, but we'll leave it open, and then it will go onto the log that we always download and read probably tomorrow, ready when we're planning for, when Mrs Simmons is planning for next week. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody. Have a lovely evening. Say bye, Mrs Simmons. You're still on screen.
Thank you. Bye.
The whole time. Bye.
Bye.
You need to mute yourself, and that's it.